right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Social Z Franchise Happy Hour. I'm the host, Calvin, coming from beautiful, sunny Florida as usual. I'm so excited to talk to Jose, who is joining us from Freezing Cold, New York. And he's got an awesome story to tell us about building a career in banking and then deciding for some reason to buy a franchise. So we're excited to hear how he got to where he is. But Jose, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to sharing some of my experience with your followers.
Thanks, Jose. So to kick us off, Jose, we ask everyone to give us an intro. Tell us a little bit about your career. Obviously, like I mentioned, you've had a great career in the banking space there in New York. But talk to us a little bit about that, and then dive into what made you decide to get into the franchising space.
Absolutely. So my name's Jose Villa. I grew up here in New York City. I live in Long Island, and I studied international business in college, really a business major. I found my way into the world of banking about 20 years ago, which really is a fantastic career. And learned a lot about, what it takes to run a business, how to grow a business, the challenges, pitfalls, the success stories. And after kind of experiencing that with my customers for about a 20-year period, I got this kind of bug inside of me that I wanted to give it a shot. I wanted to start my own business myself. I had this, goal, or I guess a dream of working someday with my kids. I've got some young kids, teenagers now, and I didn't want to just do it on my own. I didn't want to just start a business fresh with no backup, no support, just 100% risk. So I started digging into franchising and things that were more appealing to me, and franchises that I felt made the most sense and also provided the most support. And that kind of led me into looking at a couple of different brands. And fortunately enough, they opened one of the business that I eventually got into with my wife, which is Philly Pretzel Factory, about a mile away from my house. And once we tried the product, we were hooked. And fast forward, a year and a half after opening the store, here I am with a growing business. And at the same time, I was able to keep my career going with the bank.
Jose, that's great. That's great. So you work with your wife, and the plan is one day to get your kids involved in the business and kind of make this more of a legacy type of opportunity. Is that right? Yeah.
So my family, originally growing up, I grew up in kind of in the supermarket business and grocery stores with my father. So I know what that life is like. It's about hard work, dedication, and nonstop. It really teaches you kind of the work ethic it takes to be successful in anything you want to do in life. So as a moment, believe it or not, my boys do work for us, part-time after school on the weekends.
That's great.
They've learned things like, how to mop, sweep, clean, and really, learn about customer service with customers. And I think other than giving them money in their pocket, it really teaches them some really good, valuable life lessons.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you worked with your wife, Jose. Now, is she in the business full time? Does she also have a career that she's running separately, or what's the dynamic there?
Sure. So my wife is actually an educator. She's a kindergarten teacher. She also has been doing this teaching for about 18 years or so, and she helps me a lot with staffing, with employees. Really, that part of the business. She also does a lot of the social media for me, where I focus more on wholesale development and really just the operations of the business. So we have a really good partnership. Fortunately, we have a good relationship. And when things go wrong, we understand at the heart of the matter is, we're husband and wife, and we want to be successful. So we work well together.
Sure. So you grew up in an entrepreneur family. A big part of probably why you probably had that bug in you to take this leap. Being in the banking industry for so long, Jose, I imagine you saw the upside and the positives and the great things from, entrepreneurship can bring, but I'm sure you also saw some of the negatives as well. How was that conversation with your wife when you went to her and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, was she excited, or did it, take some arm twisting? How did that conversation go?
Strangely enough, it was more difficult for me to convince her to sell her house and buy a nicer, bigger house than it was for her to understand that I wanted to take a leap and start a business. She she's been around it as well. She also grew up in the supermarket business. So in a way, it kind of felt natural, like, yeah, eventually we'll have our own thing. So it didn't take very long to convince her. And I did take my time in choosing what I wanted to do. So it wasn't like I just one day decided I wanted Twist Pretzels. It was more of like, let's look at this opportunity, try out the product. Do you think we can do this? And she was bought in.
Sure. So, Jose, tell us why the Philly Pretzel franchise. What was it about that kind of led you to them? Obviously, did you work with a recruiter that kind of led you in that direction, or what was your path from deciding, hey, I'm going to go buy a franchise, to landing on ultimately Philly Pretzel?
Sure, that's a really good question. I think, like I mentioned, I did a lot of research. I looked at some of the kind of the pizza franchises. I also looked at some of the burger franchises, 3 or 4 of each. And someone had mentioned Philly Pretzel Factory. Maybe they read about it or something like that a couple of years ago, and they said, you should look into this brand. I didn't know what they were talking about. Not something that I traditionally grew up eating. But once I tried it and it was near my house, I decided to look a little deeper. So it wasn't anyone really selling to me. It was more me uncovering the opportunity and reaching out, and then being able to get interviewed and learning more about the business. So what I liked about it was, one, it's fairly new, and we're the only ones, well, we're the first ones in the borough of Queens. So usually the first one in any area for Philly Pretzel Factory is the most successful,
Sure.
After going through the initial trial period. So I like the fact that I could open up multiple locations. So it's kind of like, to me, it felt like if someone came over to you, 50 years ago and say, I have this great brand, McDonald's, and we think it would do well in your market. That's kind of what it felt like to me when I saw the amount of opportunity that was available in Philly Pretzel. And that's why I ultimately decided to choose, and I choose the favorite part of Queens, which is Forest Hills for me.
That's awesome. It's funny you mentioned that, Jose. Luis may remember the guest, but we had a guest a few weeks ago. Her family was neighbors with Ray Kroc, and they actually had that conversation, and they moved their family, I think, from Illinois to Colorado to open the first McDonald's in Colorado. And so it's funny you use that analogy, because we just heard that story just a few weeks ago. So that's pretty cool. So you're on the ground floor. How many total Philly Pretzel franchises are there in the United States now?
So in the United States, there's over 150 stores.
Oh, wow.
And I say approximate because it's always changing. They're constantly opening up in new markets, and there's different ways of opening up stores. So, for instance, you could have a full-fledged location like mine, which is with a full-size oven and baking on premises and twisting. And you could also open up kind of like satellite oven-ready locations, and those pop up occasionally. So the numbers change, but it's over 150 stores. At the last count, it was over 8 states. So it's really becoming a national chain.
That's awesome. Jose. So what did your friends and colleagues in the banking industry think when you told them, hey, I'm go start this pretzel franchise? And, what was the conversations there? Were they excited, supportive, or people telling you you're crazy? Like what was the conversations you were having?
I would say a little bit of both. I think family was more concerned for me. And the risks taking and the investments that we were making, versus colleagues who thought, why not? You've been experienced. You're a financer at heart, so you can figure your way out when there's a shortfall, or if you need money, or budgeting things. I know you'll figure it out. So I think more exciting from friends and colleagues. Family was a little bit more worried, because they love you and they want you to do well.
Sure. Jose, talk about your dynamic now in your life. Obviously, you've got your family working with you. You still got, your successful career going, and you've got this other big investment business that I'm sure you're passionate about. What's your day-to-day like? How are you balancing it all? Or is there anything that you've been surprised that, you've been struggling with from a time management standpoint? Because it's a lot to take on. Having a family, having a career, and a business are all full-time things in their own. So what's been your process to manage all that?
Absolutely. And, one of the things I left out before that I like about this business is, there's a real big wholesale component to it. So we're not so reliant on foot traffic and people buying on a whim. It's more of you set up wholesale accounts and the business kind of runs for itself. You just got to plan it properly. Uh-huh. So it allows me the opportunity to not have to be there. And I work for the bank mainly, and I oversee, because I've got good people working for me in the store, and I focus on wholesale. So I'll get a phone call or an email and they'll coordinate a new relationship with a school or a facility or a stadium. And that's where I really shine, in the fact that I'm able to work B2B. And operationally, the people run the store. I'm not going to say it's easy, because it's not. And I'm also not going to say I don't work 7 days, because I do. I am there on Saturdays. I do twist, bake, close, clean, mop, and everything. And then on Sundays, I make my way over there too, and I figure out a way to help the store. So it's really, it's every day. And at the same time, it has its ups and downs, but a lot more ups and downs for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's easier to do those 7 days when you're passionate about it and you can see the opportunity. Jose, what are the things that you've been surprised that you're not good at? What are some of the areas where you struggled, that you thought maybe you would have been better at, a year and a half, 2 years in now?
Well, I really shouldn't be surprised, but I ultimately am. When you're dealing with construction of a new location, it is definitely more complicated than I expected. And trusting people that promise something, and you have a contract, and they were recommended by someone, and you've seen their work. I kind of assumed that things would be a little bit smoother. And unfortunately, there are life circumstances. People have issues. They might have pressures, and they just don't do the right thing. And you end up having to kind of do things over again. So that's one of the more frustrating pieces of the work is, knowing who to trust. And if I had to do it all over again, just being a little bit more strict about the partners that I choose to work with, especially since I'm the one that's paying. You really want to have somebody that is kind of like a partner with you, not somebody that just wants to make a buck or figure out ways to make more money from you versus being a true partner.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that, the value that your kids are getting out of this, and, obviously you experienced it growing up in the soup industry as well. Is that something where they're excited about it? Are they ready to get up and go to work whenever you ask them to, or is it a struggle where you're like, hey, you're going to work in the store type of deal? How's that conversation been, and do they seem to show interest this early on, and once they're done with university and everything, about coming back and maybe taking on some more of the business? They're still fairly young, so I really can't dig too deep into their mentality about it. But their reaction, I think, one is they know that what the value of money is because they work for it, and they hold on to their money because they don't want to spend it. They know how hard it is to make. That's great.
And believe it or not, the older one, he actually is upset because he wants to work more. He wants to buy a car and he wants to do more hours, but he is a full-time student and we want him to focus on school. So I think overall it's been positive, and it also gets him away from the computer, away from things that aren't productive, and makes him a little bit more responsible. So I think overall they're happy, and I also know that subconsciously they know that that's what it takes to be successful in life, is really, rolling up your sleeves and getting to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's probably one of those, value adding things that you may not have forecasted when you were looking at this, that, what an experience for them that they probably wouldn't have got the same value added had you not, took the leap and bought the franchise. Jose, what's next for you within the franchise space? Are you looking to open multiple locations? You mentioned that was one of the reasons you were interested in Philly Pretzel. Is that something that's happening 2, 3, 5 years from now, or do you already have this, in the works and you're ready to keep expanding?
So if you would have asked me this 2 years ago before I opened the store, I would have said by now it'd be probably on my third location, because the whole point about it is really, it's about scale, economies of scale, and also scale in terms of total dollar volume. So the goal isn't to have one location. However, we did open during the pandemic, and that kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. And let me just say that if it wasn't for the way the government really stepped up and helped a lot of small businesses, I mean, what a wonderful country. If we would have been anywhere else, we would have been a lot far worse as a country if it wasn't for the government stepping in. So they helped it tremendously, and not only me, but I know a lot of my clients from the banking side, they benefited as well. So what a fantastic way to keep people going. But because of that, and the fact that things aren't open yet. There's still a lot of things that aren't back to normal. We have to make the store the best store that it can be. And the capacity for the store is nowhere near where it could be. I mean, we have so much room to grow, and not just because I think we can, but because I see it. There's some stores in Long Island that are doing, they're top third in the country, and they've only been around for 4 years. So we're a year and a half in. There's so much growth potential. If things turn out the way they do and the way we want them to, certainly down the road, more locations.
Absolutely. Jose, what are you going to be focused on in 2022? What are the, top 1, 2, 3 things that you're going to be spending your time on, along with everything else in your career and family, but in the business specifically, that you hope will get you, exponentially ahead, for the next 12 months?
I would say by far the number one focus for us is to keep developing the wholesale component, the wholesale business. I want to be able to buy, especially in the pretzel business, it's really more of a morning type of thing with schools and things like that. I want to be able to say we completed our number for the day, the goal, by 11 o'clock in the morning. We're done. We knew what we needed to do. We hit our number. We covered our expenses. We made a little money. And that way we have 8 more hours of just additional business. And it's possible. So certainly building up the wholesale business. And at the same time, we do a lot of concerts in Queens. We did Central Park last summer, which was our best day ever. So building up the wholesale business and also the events business. So we're not reliant on one stream of income. Third-party companies that do deliveries are helpful as well. Foot traffic, but really the wholesale and the concerts are a big focus for me.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like both are great opportunities to keep expanding. And as you said, you still have a ton of capacity left, and hopefully it continues to grow for you. Jose, what I'd ask you to do before we wrap up is, share, words of wisdom for anyone who might be listening to this is thinking about buying a franchise, maybe specifically looking at buying a Philly Pretzel franchise. But, what are some, if it was you, 3 years ago, thinking about whether or not this was worth taking the risk and the time, sweat, energy, tears, what would you tell Jose 3 years ago or someone right now looking at this opportunity, whether or not they should jump on it?
Absolutely. And funny thing is, you mentioned there haven't been any tears yet. Despite all of the craziness and,
Sure.
Somebody would have been really scared off by the pandemic and all that. It's life and more learning experiences every day. So what I would say, let me think. So Philly Pretzel Factory, it's still a relatively new brand. So, there's a lot more to come for the brand. And every day they're innovating. So I like the fact that it's a relatively small franchise, and I was able to connect with the folks before I decided to sign on. So the support has been fantastic, the open lines of communication. And if you're looking for a business where you could really impact sales yourself, where you're able to, make those connections and sign a contract with the stadium and really generate big numbers, this franchise is really good for that because it's all about, value and volume. So our pretzels are inexpensive, and we sell them in bulk and we bake them in bulk. So that part of the business is fantastic. As far as what people decide to do, I actually have a good friend of mine who has a similar background, and he and his wife, they wanted to do a franchise, but they chose more in the educational, so the daycare business. And if that's what you want to do, it's more of a, white collar professional type of job. Listen, there are so many different franchises you can look into. It's really the one that you connect with most. And before you make any decisions, definitely interview other franchisees and make sure that the training and the lines of communication with the franchisor are open.
Awesome. Well, Jose, thank you so much again. And for anyone who took the time to listen to Jose's story this evening, we really, really appreciate it. And we hope you join us next time on the Social Z.